The dawn broke over Southside Chicago with a pale, unforgiving light, casting long shadows across the cracked sidewalks of Inglewood. At precisely 5 o'clock a.m., Samuel Carter, a 63-year-old man with a wiry frame and a face etched with quiet resolve, rose from his narrow bed in a modest one-room apartment. The room was Spartan, every item in its place: a neatly made bed, a single chair, a small table with a chipped coffee mug that read "World's Greatest Uncle." Though Samuel had no nieces or nephews, his life was a study in discipline, a relic of a past he kept locked away, hidden from a world that had taught him to stay invisible. Samuel's morning routine was unyielding, a ritual forged in the crucible of military precision. 20 push-ups, each executed with the same controlled strength he'd honed decades ago. A cold shower to sharpen his senses, a breakfast of plain oatmeal with a sliced apple, eaten in silence as he sipped black coffee from that chipped mug. By 5:45 he was out the door, his worn work boots hitting the pavement for the 10-block walk to Inglewood Steel Works, where he'd toiled as a janitor for the past 12 years. The streets were quiet at this hour, the city still rubbing sleep from its eyes. Samuel preferred it that way. Invisibility was his shield, his armor against a society that had long ago shown him the cost of standing out. Inglewood Steelworks was a sprawling factory that churned out components for everything from cars to military vehicles. Recently, the plant had landed a massive Pentagon contract, a fact that had the management team led by the smug 38-year-old plant manager Nathan Caldwell strutting around like they'd won the lottery. For Samuel, it meant longer hours, more floors to scrub, more trash to haul. As he swiped his faded ID card at the employee entrance, the security guard, a burly man named Reggie, gave him a curt nod. Samuel returned it, his eyes already lowered, his posture deferential. Inside, he slipped into the janitorial closet that doubled as a break room, pulling on his gray uniform with the name tag that read simply, Sam. "Yo, Sam, you ever gonna retire, old man?" called out Jamal, a 24-year-old janitor with a quick grin and a habit of treating Samuel like a relic. "Place fall apart without you, though, right?" Samuel offered a faint smile, his voice soft but steady. "Morn, Jamal. Work's gotta get done." His words were measured, carrying the cadence of a man who'd learned to speak only when necessary. Growing up in 1960 Mississippi, Samuel had seen what happened to black boys who spoke too boldly, looked too directly. His father, a sharecropper, had been called boy by men half his age. His mother had scrubbed white folks' floors for pennies. The lessons of those years, of segregated schools, of colored-only signs, still lingered in Samuel's bones, even if the world had changed on the surface. As he pushed his cleaning cart toward the factory's administrative wing, the memories came unbidden. His father's bowed head, his mother's weary hands, the sting of being told to know your place. Samuel shook them off, focusing on the task at hand. By 7:30, the morning shift was in full swing, managers and office workers streaming past without a glance. Samuel had perfected the art of being unseen, a ghost who left only polished floors and empty trash cans as proof of his existence. He moved with a quiet efficiency, mopping hallways, wiping down railings, his presence as unobtrusive as the hum of the machinery. Around 9:30 a.m., as Samuel polished the glass doors of the executive conference room, he overheard a group of young white workers from the assembly line. "Yes, sir, no, sir, whatever you say, boss," one of them mocked in a exaggerated drawl as they passed, mimicking Samuel's deferential tone. The others snickered, their laughter sharp and careless. Samuel kept his eyes on his work, his face impassive. He'd learned long ago that reacting only fed their cruelty. The taunts were nothing new, just echoes of a lifetime spent navigating a world that demanded his humility. Midday brought Nathan Caldwell, the plant manager, striding toward Samuel with the arrogance of a man who believed his success was entirely his own. Caldwell was a Chicago native, born into a family with connections that had smoothed his path to power. His pale blue eyes barely met Samuel's as he spoke. "Carter, there's a spill in the men's room on the production floor. Some idiot made a mess. Clean it up now." His tone was clipped, as if Samuel were an afterthought. Yes, sir, Mr. Caldwell, Samuel replied, his voice low, automatic. Caldwell paused, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. And tomorrow we've got brass from the Defense Department touring the plant for the new contract. Stay out of sight, understand? We don't need— He gestured vaguely at Samuel, the implication clear. An old black janitor didn't fit the image Inglewood Steelworks wanted to project. Without waiting for a response, Caldwell walked away, his polished shoes clicking on the floor Samuel had just cleaned. Samuel's grip tightened on the mop handle, his knuckles paling for a moment before he forced himself to relax. 40 years ago, he might have reacted differently, but that was another life, another man. Now he was just Sam Carter, the janitor nobody saw. That evening, as the factory buzzed with preparations for the Pentagon visit, Samuel stayed late, ensuring every surface gleamed. He mopped the hallway outside the executive offices, the repetitive motion soothing in its familiarity. A group of men in crisp Air Force uniforms emerged from a meeting, their voices carrying down the corridor. Samuel kept his head down, focusing on his task. "We'll reconvene at 800 tomorrow for the full tour," said a voice that made Samuel's hand falter, just for a split second. Something in its timbre, its commanding edge, stirred a memory buried deep. Against his better judgment, Samuel glanced up. The officer was Colonel David Harper, a tall man in his early 50s, his dress blues immaculate. For a fleeting moment their eyes met. Harper's brow furrowed, a shadow of recognition crossing his face before he turned away, continuing his conversation. Samuel resumed mopping, his heart pounding in a way it hadn't in years. The moment passed, but it left Samuel unsettled. Driving home in his 20-year-old Ford, maintained with the same precision he'd once applied to his gear, he took a circuitous route, checking his mirrors out of habit. Old instincts, never fully dormant, whispered caution. At his apartment, Samuel went straight to the kitchen, not to eat but to nudge the refrigerator aside, revealing a hidden panel in the wall. Behind it was a small metal box, its surface dulled by time. He didn't open it. He never did. Knowing it was there, untouched, was enough. He replaced the panel and slid the refrigerator back into place. On the small TV in his living room, a documentary about Air Force Special Operations flickered, the narrator recounting a declassified mission in 1978. Operation Desert Mirage, conducted by a joint task force in the Persian Gulf. Samuel shook his head, his voice barely audible. February, not March, and it wasn't a joint task force. It was us. The words were spoken to an empty room, a quiet correction to a history that had erased him. The neighborhood kids knew him as Mr. Sam, the quiet old man who sometimes handed out peppermint candies. The adults nodded politely, assuming he was just another retiree with a modest pension. Once a month, Samuel attended veterans events at the local VFW post, sitting in the back listening to stories of service. He never claimed to be a veteran himself, never wore a service pin. He was there to honor others, to remember a world he'd left behind. No one suspected that the unassuming janitor had once moved through war zones like a phantom, that his hands had wielded both salvation and destruction with equal skill, that the name Spectre had once been spoken in hushed tones among those who knew. Samuel Carter had vanished into the anonymity of an ordinary life, carrying secrets heavier than any burden he'd ever shouldered. But secrets, like ghosts, have a way of rising when least expected. 40 years earlier, in the sweltering summer of 1973, a 23-year-old Samuel Carter stood on the campus of Jackson State University, his eyes sharp and wary. A plainclothes recruiter, a white man with a crew cut and a clipboard, approached him during a career fair. "Son, we're looking for men with your qualities," the man said, his gaze lingering on Samuel's athletic build, his steady demeanor. The word black went unspoken, but its weight hung in the air. Samuel, the son of a Korean War veteran who'd come home to a segregated South, knew what was being offered: a chance to serve in a country that rarely opened its doors to men like him. The training was hell, designed to break even the strongest. At a covert facility in the Nevada desert, Samuel faced grueling physical and psychological tests. White instructors didn't hide their skepticism. "Carter won't last 3 days," one muttered, loud enough to be overheard. "They don't have what it takes for this work." Samuel proved them wrong, shattering records in marksmanship, survival skills, and hand-to-hand combat, yet when commendations were given, his name was never called. His first mission came in 1974, a covert operation in Vietnam's Mekong Delta. Officially, the U.S. had withdrawn, but Samuel's team was sent to extract a high-value asset. When their position was overrun, it was Samuel who held the line, drawing enemy fire to allow his team to escape. He carried a wounded sergeant 2 miles through the jungle, his own arm bleeding from a grazing bullet. The mission report praised Lieutenant Robert Grayson for exceptional leadership. Samuel's name appeared only as support personnel. This became the pattern of his career. For 15 years, Samuel served as Spectre, a code name whispered among operators. He ran point on the most dangerous missions: Vietnam, Cambodia, Angola, Nicaragua, Iraq. Always the first through the door, the last to leave. He saved 38 American lives, neutralized threats no one else could touch, and completed objectives deemed impossible. Yet his contributions were buried, his name redacted, his medals awarded to others. "Keep your head down, Carter," his first commander had told him. "Men like us don't get statues." By us, he meant black operators, expendable in the eyes of those who wrote the reports. The final blow came in 1989 during a botched operation in Iraq. Bad intelligence, no air support, and a timeline that screamed sabotage. Samuel completed the mission, extracting most of his team, but 3 men died. Back at base, he faced a review board. "Your actions were reckless, Carter," a senior officer said, ignoring the flawed intel and impossible odds. He was discharged with a record that claimed 6 years of clerical work. The medals he'd earned were never pinned. The men he'd saved were silenced. Spectre officially never existed. Back in the present, Samuel lay awake that night, the encounter with Colonel Harper gnawing at him. He knew the risks of being seen, of being remembered. The metal box behind the refrigerator held the only proof of his past: mission logs, a single photograph, a dog tag from a fallen teammate. It was his insurance, his anchor to a truth the world had tried to erase. As he drifted toward sleep, the TV droned on. A news anchor discussing the upcoming Pentagon tour at Inglewood Steelworks, a historic contract that underscores Chicago's role in national defense. Samuel switched it off, the irony bitter in his throat. Tomorrow he'd be invisible again, scrubbing floors while men in uniforms shook hands over deals built on the labor of men like him. But somewhere deep in his chest, a spark of defiance flickered, a reminder of the man he'd been, the hero no one knew. The stage was set for a reckoning, though Samuel couldn't yet see it. The shadows he'd lived in were about to crack, and the truth, long buried, was clawing its way to the surface. The air inside Inglewood Steelworks' main assembly hall was thick with anticipation. Rows of folding chairs lined the polished concrete floor, filled with local politicians, Air Force officers in crisp dress blues, and reporters clutching notepads. The annual military appreciation ceremony was a big deal this year, a showcase for the plant's new Pentagon contract. Banners proclaiming, "Proud to serve America," hung from the rafters, and the hum of patriotic pride buzzed through the crowd. Samuel Carter, however, was nowhere near the spotlight. Tucked away in the west wing, he pushed his mop across the linoleum, the rhythmic swish a quiet counterpoint to the pomp unfolding in the distance. Plant manager Nathan Caldwell had been explicit. "Carter, keep those floors spotless, and stay out of sight. We don't need you distracting our guests." The words stung, but Samuel's face betrayed nothing. He'd heard worse. For decades, he'd swallowed the indignity, his past buried deeper than the grime he scrubbed away. As he worked, the muffled voice of the keynote speaker carried through the walls. Colonel David Harper, a decorated Air Force officer with a commanding presence, was at the podium, his voice booming over the PA system. "Today we celebrate the partnership between Inglewood Steelworks and the United States Air Force, a bond forged in the crucible of service and sacrifice." Samuel tuned it out, focusing on his task. He had no desire to be part of this world again, a world that had used him, discarded him, and erased him. But then a young voice broke through his solitude. "Mr. Sam, you gotta come see this," said Malik Thompson, a 22-year-old assembly line worker with a quick smile and a passion for military history. He'd taken a liking to Samuel, often pestering him with questions about old war stories, unaware of the truth Samuel carried. Colonel Harper's talking about covert ops. Thought you'd eat this stuff up, being a history buff and all. Samuel shook his head, his voice soft but firm. Got work to do, Malik. Mr. Caldwell wouldn't like it. But Malik was persistent, his enthusiasm infectious. Come on, man, just for a minute. Caldwell's too busy schmoozing to notice. Against his better judgment, Samuel relented, following Malik to the back of the packed hall. He stood near the exit, mop in hand, ready to slip away if needed. The crowd was rapt, hanging on Harper's every word. In the shadows of our nation's history, there are heroes whose names never grace the headlines, whose sacrifices remain locked in classified files, Harper said, his voice heavy with gravitas. One such man was known only as Spectre, a legend in the world of special operations. Samuel's breath caught, the mop handle slipping from his fingers. It hit the floor with a sharp clatter, drawing annoyed glances from nearby attendees. Harper's eyes snapped to the sound, locking onto Samuel's. For a heartbeat, the world stopped. Recognition flickered in Harper's gaze, raw and unguarded. Spectre, he said into the microphone, his voice barely above a whisper, yet it echoed like a gunshot. The hall erupted in murmurs. Phones were raised, capturing the moment. Samuel stood frozen, decades of carefully constructed anonymity shattering in an instant. Harper, undeterred, pressed on, his voice rising with conviction. Spectre conducted over 70 high-risk missions from 1973 to 1989. He saved the lives of 38 American servicemen, including my own father, a man who wouldn't be here today without him. The crowd gasped, reporters scribbling furiously. Two men in dark suits at the edge of the room began moving toward the stage, their faces grim. Officially, Spectre doesn't exist, Harper continued, pointing directly at Samuel. But he's standing right there, in this very room. His name is Samuel Carter. Chaos broke loose. Nathan Caldwell pushed through the crowd, his face a mask of confusion and outrage. Carter! What the hell is this? He demanded, his voice shrill. Reporters swarmed Samuel, their questions a barrage. Were you really a special operator? Why were your records erased? Was it because you're black? Samuel's instincts screamed to run, to vanish as he'd been trained, but his feet were rooted. Malik appeared at his side, guiding him toward a service exit. Let's get you out of here, Mr. Sam, he said quietly. They slipped out as security tried to restore order, the hall buzzing like a kicked hornet's nest. By the time Samuel reached his apartment, the story was exploding online. Viral clips of Harper's speech lit up social media, hashtags like Spectre Revealed trending nationwide. News vans lined the street outside his building. Samuel slipped in through a back entrance, his heart pounding. Inside, he sensed it immediately. The air was wrong. His furniture was slightly askew. The refrigerator shifted just enough to betray tampering. He slid it aside, his hands trembling as he opened the hidden panel. The metal box, his last tether to the truth, was gone. Mission logs, a photograph, a dog tag from a fallen brother in arms, all stolen. Samuel sank onto his worn couch, the weight of his erased life crushing him. He was exposed, vulnerable, with no proof to back Harper's claims. His landline rang, a number few had. He answered cautiously. Stay hidden, Spectre, a gravelly voice said. They're coming for you again. The line went dead. Samuel's mind raced. The voice was familiar, a ghost from his past, but he couldn't place it. He packed a small bag, essentials only, muscle memory guiding him. As he prepared to leave, his TV flashed with breaking news. Colonel David Harper suspended pending investigation for disclosing classified information. Samuel switched it off, his jaw tight. The truth was out, and the machine was moving to bury it again. Miles away, in a dimly lit office at Scott Air Force Base, Colonel David Harper sat across from his commanding officer, General Margaret Ellis. Two men in civilian suits, Department of Defense officials, flanked her. You've compromised national security, Colonel, Ellis said, her tone icy. This Spectre nonsense stops now. With respect, ma'am, Harper replied, his voice steady. I recognized a man who saved my father's life. Samuel Carter served with unmatched courage, and his contributions were erased because of his race. That's the real compromise here. The taller suit leaned forward, his eyes cold. You're treading on dangerous ground, Harper. Drop this, or you'll face a court-martial. Harper met his gaze, unyielding. He'd grown up on his father's stories of Spectre, the operative who moved like a ghost, who saved an entire unit in Cambodia. His father, a retired Air Force captain, had whispered the name with reverence, saying, "The brass buried him because they couldn't stomach their best being a black man." Harper wasn't backing down. That night, Harper drove to a Southside VFW post, a place Samuel was known to visit. The bartender, a grizzled Vietnam vet named Otis, polished a glass as Harper approached. "Looking for info on an older black guy. Comes to events here, sits in the back. Quiet. Named Sam Carter." Otis nodded, recognition in his eyes. "Sam? Yeah, he's a regular. Some old factory worker who likes war stories. Why?" Harper chose his words carefully. "Thought I knew him from somewhere. Ever mentioned serving?" Otis shook his head. "Nah, never said he was military, but the way he carries himself, some of us figured he might have been." Harper thanked him, his suspicions confirmed. Samuel wasn't just a janitor. He was a warrior, and Harper was determined to prove it. Samuel, meanwhile, knew he couldn't stay in Chicago. The stolen box meant someone high up was scared enough to risk breaking into his home. He caught a bus to a rundown neighborhood on the city's west side, where a narrow row house served as a safe haven for ghosts like him. He knocked in a coded pattern, praying the protocol hadn't changed. The door creaked open, revealing Isaiah Brooks, a silver-haired man with sharp eyes and a face carved by years of secrets. "Samuel Carter," Isaiah said, his voice low. "Or should I say, Spectre. Never thought I'd see you again." "Sorry to drop in, Isaiah," Samuel replied, stepping inside. "Things just got complicated." Isaiah, codenamed Shadow, had been one of the few black operatives in their program, a master of infiltration who'd left the service for a quieter life as a private security consultant. The safe house was modest outside, but inside it was a fortress of modern tech and old memories. Isaiah poured 2 glasses of bourbon, his expression grim. "Saw you on the news. Hell of a way to break cover." Over the next hour, Samuel recounted the day's events, Harper's revelation, the stolen box, the mysterious call. Isaiah listened, his face darkening. "They used us because we were disposable," he said when Samuel finished. "Black operators for deniable ops. Succeed, and someone else gets the medal. Fail, and you never existed." He pulled up a tablet showing a news clip of Harper's speech. "This colonel's stirring up a hornet's nest. Pentagon's already denying everything. Called you a delusional old man." Samuel stared into his untouched bourbon, the weight of decades pressing down. "I just wanted to be left alone, Isaiah. But they took my proof." Isaiah leaned forward. "You weren't the only one who kept insurance. I've got mission logs from Angola, tucked away where they can't touch 'em. We need to find the others. Anyone still alive who remembers." They began making calls using encrypted lines to reach former teammates. One name stood out. Jeremiah Hayes, codenamed Prophet, now doing aid work in Haiti. He'd kept radio transcripts from their missions hidden in a safe deposit box. As they worked, Samuel's phone buzzed with a text from Malik. "Media's saying you made it all up, Mr. Sam. But I found something. Old newspaper from 75. Photo of a military ceremony. Guy in the back looks like you, but his uniform's edited out. I've got more. Want to see?" Samuel showed the message to Isaiah, who whistled. "Kid's sharp." Back then, redactions weren't digital. Papers like that could be gold. The next morning, the city woke to a firestorm. Malik had posted the newspaper photo online, sparking a wave of speculation. Veterans groups demanded answers. Civil rights organizations called for hearings. Samuel and Isaiah drove through the night to a remote cabin in southern Illinois, a place where their unit had once stashed evidence of their service. The cabin was a relic, its wood warped, its windows boarded. Samuel pried up a floorboard, revealing a waterproof case. Inside were documents, photos, and a single cassette tape, proof of missions the Pentagon swore never happened. "This is it," Samuel said, his voice thick with emotion. "Everything they tried to erase." As they sorted through the evidence, a breaking news alert flashed on Isaiah's laptop. Colonel Harper faced court-martial for endangering national security. His father, retired Captain Robert Harper, spoke from a hospital bed, his voice frail but fierce. Spectre saved my unit in Cambodia. Without him, I'd be dead, and my son wouldn't exist. The truth can't stay buried. The words hit Samuel like a punch, tears welling in his eyes for the first time in years. He thought of the men he'd lost, the brothers whose names were raced alongside his. This wasn't just about him anymore. Malik arrived at the cabin that evening, his car packed with old newspapers and microfiche he'd dug up from a local library. "Look at this," he said, spreading out clippings. Each showed Samuel, or someone who looked uncannily like him, in the background of military ceremonies, his presence scrubbed from official records. "You're in these photos, Mr. Sam. They tried to erase you, but they missed the archive." The trio planned their next move, a public ceremony at Chicago's Grant Park, unsanctioned and defiant, to honor Samuel and other forgotten black operators. Malik used his social media savvy to spread the word, rallying support from veterans and activists. But as the event neared, the threats escalated. Samuel's phone rang with another block call. "You're making a mistake, Spectre," the same voice hissed. "Walk away or you'll lose more than a box." Samuel's resolve hardened. He was done running. The day of the ceremony dawned gray and cold. Thousands gathered in Grant Park, a sea of faces, veterans, families, young activists, holding signs that read, "Honor Spectre" and "Black Heroes Matter." Samuel stood on a makeshift stage, his heart pounding as he faced the crowd. Isaiah introduced him, his voice carrying the weight of their shared past. "This man served in shadows so we could stand in the light. Today we tell his truth." Before Samuel could speak, a line of security forces approached, led by General Edward Langley, a towering figure with a chest full of medals. "This gathering is unauthorized," Langley announced through a bullhorn. "Disperse immediately for national security reasons." The crowd booed, chanting, "Let him speak!" Tension crackled as the forces closed in. Samuel recognized Langley instantly, the officer who'd taken credit for his Cambodia mission, who'd built a career on Samuel's blood and sacrifice. Langley's eyes met Samuel's, a flicker of fear beneath his bluster. Isaiah stepped forward, holding up his phone. "General Langley, you might want to hear this before you shut us down." He played a recording from 1989, Langley's voice cold and clear. "Leave Carter. He's expendable. The mission's bigger than one man." Gasp rippled through the crowd. Malik live-streamed the moment, the video spreading like wildfire. Langley's face paled, his authority crumbling before the world. Samuel took the microphone, his voice steady but laced with a lifetime of pain. "I served because I believed in this country, even when it didn't believe in me. I carried men to safety, bled for missions that never bore my name. But this isn't about me. It's about every black soldier whose courage was erased, whose sacrifices were buried. We're not invisible anymore." The crowd roared, tears streaming down faces young and old. A Vietnam vet in the front row saluted, his hand trembling. A young woman clutched a photo of her grandfather, another unsung hero. Samuel's words cut through the rain, a beacon for those who'd been silenced. Langley retreated, escorted away by his own men, his legacy unraveling with every step. As the ceremony ended, Colonel Harper appeared, his uniform stripped of rank, but his eyes alight with purpose. "I'm with you, Carter," he said. "My father's dying, but he told me to finish this. For you, for him, for all of them." Samuel nodded, his throat tight. The truth was out, and the fight was just beginning. Somewhere in the crowd, Malik raised his phone, capturing the moment when a janitor became a hero, when shadows gave way to light. Congressional hearing room in Washington, D.C. was a crucible of tension, its air heavy with the weight of history about to be rewritten. Samuel Carter sat at the witness table, his 63-year-old frame unbowed, his posture as rigid as the day he'd first donned a uniform. The room was packed. Senators, reporters, military brass, and a gallery of spectators, their eyes fixed on the man who'd been invisible for decades. Outside, a crowd swelled along the Capitol steps, organized by Malik Thompson, the young Englewood Steelworks worker who'd become Samuel's fiercest ally. Signs reading Honor Spectre and Truth for Black Heroes bobbed above the sea of faces, their chants audible even through the thick walls. Samuel's heart pounded not from fear, but from the surreal reality of being seen, truly seen, for the first time in 40 years. Senator Elizabeth Warwick, chair of the Armed Services Committee, leaned into her microphone, her voice measured but piercing. Mr. Carter, you've made grave allegations about systemic discrimination against black special operators, including yourself. You claim to have conducted over 70 covert missions, saving 38 American lives, yet your service was erased. What evidence can you provide to substantiate these extraordinary claims? Samuel's gaze was steady, his voice low but resonant, carrying the quiet authority of a man who'd faced death and betrayal without flinching. Madam Senator, I've submitted mission logs, photographs, and recordings, documents my team and I preserved because we knew this day would come. We knew our sacrifices would be buried unless we guarded the truth ourselves. He gestured to a stack of files meticulously compiled with Isaiah Brooks at the Illinois cabin. The evidence was irrefutable. Handwritten notes from commanders, grainy photos of Samuel in war zones where America claimed no presence, a cassette tape capturing debriefs where his actions were praised, then omitted from official records. The room fell silent. Senator Warwick reviewed a photograph from 1975, showing a young Samuel in the background of a military ceremony, his uniform blurred, his name tag erased. "This is compelling, Mr. Carter," she said, her tone softening. "But the Pentagon maintains that no operator named Spectre existed. How do you respond?" "The absence of records is the point," Samuel replied, his words cutting through the room like a blade. "Our missions were deniable. When we succeeded, others took the credit. When we failed, we took the blame. Erasing black excellence wasn't a mistake. It was policy." A murmur rippled through the gallery, cameras flashing as reporters scribbled furiously. The questioning turned hostile when Senator Harold Grayson took the floor, his voice dripping with skepticism. "Mr. Carter, isn't it possible you're an aging man chasing glory, perhaps confused about your service? The Pentagon has no record of these operations." Samuel's eyes met Grayson's, unflinching. "With respect, Senator, I'm not confused. I carried men to safety, bled for this country, and watched my name erased while others wore my medals. If that's glory, I've had none of it." The turning point came when General Thomas Bradley, a grizzled officer nearing retirement, requested to speak. Bradley, a towering figure with a silver star pinned to his chest, approached the witness table, his face etched with emotion. "I've served this nation for 40 years, he began, his voice cracking, "and every day I've carried the debt to the man before you." The room stilled as Bradley recounted a 1976 mission in Angola. "My unit was ambushed, pinned down in a ravine. I took a bullet to the chest, couldn't move. The official report says Captain James Whitaker carried me out. That's a lie." He turned to Samuel, tears brimming. "Samuel Carter, codenamed Spectre, dragged me 4 miles through enemy territory, under fire with his own leg torn open. He saved my life, saved my entire team. When the medals were handed out, Whitaker got the glory. Spectre got nothing." The gallery erupted in gasps, some spectators weeping openly. Malik, watching from the back, live-streamed the moment, his hands shaking as he captured Bradley's testimony. Samuel's throat tightened, the weight of decades lifting and crushing him all at once. Bradley's voice broke as he continued, "I've stayed silent too long, ashamed of my own cowardice. Samuel, I'm sorry." Samuel nodded, his eyes glistening, but his composure unbroken. "You're speaking now, General. That's enough." The Pentagon's representatives shifted uncomfortably, their strategy unraveling. A spokesperson attempted to pivot, acknowledging Samuel's limited service, but downplaying its scope. While Mr. Carter may have participated in certain operations, his role has been overstated. The words rang hollow, drowned out by the evidence and Bradley's raw confession. Outside, the crowd had grown to thousands, spilling across the Capitol lawn. Malik's social media posts had ignited a movement, with veterans and activists joining hands. Inglewood Steelworks workers, led by Malik, had walked out in protest after he was fired by Nathan Caldwell for insubordination. Caldwell, desperate to save face, gave interviews claiming he had always suspected Samuel's heroism, a lie that drew jeers from those who knew his disdain for the janitor. As Samuel left the hearing, escorted by Capitol security, two men in dark suits cornered him in a parking garage. "This ends now, Carter," one hissed. "Too many careers are at stake. Walk away, or you'll regret it." Before Samuel could respond, Colonel David Harper appeared, flanked by his own security detail. "Back off," Harper warned, his voice steel. The men retreated, but their threat lingered like smoke. Weeks later, Samuel stood in the East Room of the White House, the air electric with anticipation. The President of the United States stepped forward, the Medal of Honor gleaming in his hands. Samuel's posture was military perfect, his gray suit a stark contrast to the janitor's uniform he'd worn for years. The citation rang out, detailing missions that had been erased. Infiltrations in Vietnam, rescues in Cambodia, a doomed operation in Iraq where Samuel's courage saved lives against impossible odds. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life, above and beyond the call of duty, the President intoned, placing the medal around Samuel's neck. The room erupted in applause, dignitaries and veterans rising to their feet. Samuel's eyes found Malik in the crowd, the young man beaming with pride. Isaiah Brooks stood nearby, his silver hair catching the light, a rare smile breaking through his stoic demeanor. General Bradley saluted from the front row, tears streaming down his face. For Samuel, the moment was surreal, a lifetime of shadows giving way to blinding light. The aftermath was transformative. Inglewood Steelworks reinstated Malik as a supervisor, demoting Nathan Caldwell to a desk job under Malik's oversight. A poetic twist that brought Samuel quiet satisfaction. The Pentagon established a commission to review cases of discrimination in military honors, with Samuel's evidence sparking a wave of investigations. Dozens of black and minority veterans came forward, their stories echoing Samuel's, their service finally acknowledged. General Edward Langley, the officer who'd built his career on Samuel's stolen valor, faced a reckoning. His medals were rescinded, his retirement forced amid a storm of public outrage. Investigations into his command decisions hinted at darker truths. Missions designed to fail. Black operators sent into traps with no support. The possibility of deliberate sabotage hung heavy, a question Samuel and Isaiah vowed to pursue. Samuel became a reluctant icon, his story a beacon for those silenced by history. He declined book deals and movie offers, choosing instead to speak at schools and community centers where he shared lessons of resilience with wide-eyed kids. "Your service should never require invisibility," he told a group of black cadets at West Point. "Faces alight with hope. Document your truth. Never let anyone erase you." The most poignant moment came when Samuel donated his Medal of Honor to the National Museum of African American History and Culture. "This isn't mine alone," he said at the ceremony, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "It belongs to every black soldier who served in shadows, whose courage was buried. Let it stand where all can see it." The crowd, packed with veterans and families, wept as the medal was placed in a glass case beside a photo of Samuel as a young operator finally declassified. The exhibit, titled Unseen Valor, became a pilgrimage site for those seeking truth. Yet the story wasn't over. Late one night, as Samuel sat in his Chicago apartment, his chipped World's Greatest Uncle mug in hand, his phone buzzed with a blocked number. He answered, his instincts sharp. "You think you've won, Spectre," the voice said, low and menacing, "but some truths are too dangerous to be free. Watch your back." The line went dead. Samuel's eyes narrowed, his gaze drifting to the window where city lights flickered against the dark. He thought of the cabin in Illinois where more evidence lay hidden, documents that could expose not just discrimination, but a conspiracy reaching the highest ranks. Langley's fall was only the beginning. Someone was still out there, guarding secrets that could shake the military to its core. He rose, his movements deliberate, and packed a small bag. Isaiah had texted earlier, hinting at a lead on a surviving teammate who knew more about the Iraq mission's sabotage. Malik was digging deeper into old archives, uncovering names of other erased operators. The fight for truth wasn't over. It was evolving, growing, threatening to unravel a web of lies that stretched far beyond Samuel's story. As he stepped into the night, the Chicago skyline looming, Samuel felt the weight of his past and the fire of his purpose. The invisible man was gone. Spectre had returned, not as a ghost, but as a force. The shadows could no longer hold him, but what lay ahead was uncertain. A battle for justice that might demand one final mission, one last stand against those who do anything to keep the truth buried.